Greetings friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of September 21st, 2025. A great number of very interesting events have occurred today. So let's begin. Well, now let's move to the line of contact, and we'll start with the Zaporizhia sector, where the Russian army, as part of the Vostok group of forces, continues its offensive, advancing towards the Poltavsky and Uspanivsky fortified areas. Let me remind you that just yesterday, the Russian army completely cleared the settlement of Berezov, and corresponding objective control footage was published. Today, this information is being confirmed by both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Western cartographers. Corresponding adjustments are being made to the maps, and immediately after clearing the settlement of Berezov, the Russian army moved further. At the moment, a vector of advance is noted, most likely of the 36th Army, towards the settlement of Stepov. The 29th will likely be closing the offensive from the direction of Kalinivske. Meanwhile, the 5th Army continues its offensive in the area of Novoivanivka. Some work is now underway to, let's say, straighten the front line between the offensives of the three armies. Between the southern, the central, and the northern offensives along these forest belts, as well as to various ravines, rivers, forest belts, fields, and so on and so forth. But in general, for now, no more such global changes on the ground are noted. Apparently, there is also a regrouping of the Vostok group of forces before the start of hostilities for the first fortified area, a more or less serious fortified area at Poltavsky, after which it will most likely be Uspanivsky, and then on towards Huliaipol. Next, we move towards the Pokrovsk agglomeration, from where a lot of news is coming. Let me remind you that this is where the general battle of 2025 is currently taking place. So far, no one can fully seize the initiative 100%. Sometimes the Russian army advances, and adjustments are made in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Sometimes Ukrainian formations counterattack, and corresponding adjustments are also made to the maps. But in general, if we take it week by week, the front line hardly changes, with one small exception. Still, the Russian army is slightly adjusting the map, slightly adjusting the line of contact. This is especially clearly visible in the southwestern, southern, and southeastern parts of the city of Pokrovsk itself and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Today, as you can see, corresponding adjustments have been made. Today, footage is being published from the central part of the settlement of Pokrovsk, as well as from the territory of the settlement of Novopavlivka. Let's look at this footage, and here we can observe how Ukrainian FPV drone operators are striking the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, both in the central part of Pokrovsk and in the central part of the settlement of Novopavlivka. Based on this footage, we are making adjustments to the maps. So far, there has been no information regarding the settlement of Chinishino. It may still be under the control of the AFU, as is the railway connecting Chinishino with the settlement of Hnativka. But in general, the Russian army's plan is clear. The main problem that the Russian Federation is facing here is the central citadel, or rather the huge Pokrovsk citadel, which stretches, so to speak, from the side of the railway up to the Lazurny, Sonyachny, and Shakhtarsky micro-districts. This is a zone of high-rise buildings located in the southern part of the settlement. In fact, what we have just outlined on the map with a yellow line is one large high-rise development, which the Ukrainian side has turned into a powerful fortified area, which the Russian side has been trying to storm, so to speak, from the first attempts to enter the territory of this settlement. Sometimes they manage to seep through some buildings, but for now this fortress remains impregnable for the Russian army. Let me remind you that the Russian side has changed its tactics in recent days, deciding not to storm this citadel for the time being, due to the fact that it is probably impossible to do so at the moment. Now the Russian army is focused on clearing western Pokrovsk along the railway, up to the industrial area located in the western part of Pokrovsk. And now we see that the Russian army has increased the intensity of its attacks in the southeastern part, apparently with the aim of bypassing the Pokrovsk citadel and reaching the settlement of Hnativka, as well as the settlement of Roka, located in the western part. Perhaps if the Russian army manages to break through the defenses, to clear all the above-mentioned settlements, it may be possible in such a situation to encircle the entire Pokrovsk citadel and this will actually force the AFU to leave this fortified area without a fight, as storming it head-on is not working out so far. In the eastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, hostilities continue along the Myrnohrad, Nove, Ekonomichny line. In this footage, we can observe the remains of the eastern part of Myrnohrad. In the Myrnohrad, let's say, citadel, there are also a large number of buildings, high-rises, 9-story buildings, each of which is a powerful fortified area. In this way, the aviation of the Russian army is gradually leveling this area with the ground. At the same time, the main hostilities are unfolding in Novekonomichny. Let me remind you that yesterday we made an adjustment to the map in the area of the school in the central part of the city based on footage published by the Ukrainian side. Just yesterday, most cartographer experts came to the conclusion that the Ukrainian side had lost control over this area. And today this information is confirmed by pro-Ukrainian cartographers. According to their data, the Russian side has launched a decisive counter-offensive in the Novo-Ekonomichny direction, with the aim of finally pushing the Ukrainian formations out of this area, taking control of the entire settlement, as well as a network of strongholds located east of Myrnohrad. And all these counterstrikes are being made at the very moment when the Ukrainian side is trying to counterattack in the breakthrough and salient zone. Today, a number of pro-Russian experts stated that the situation is very difficult in the breakthrough zone, but still under control. That is, despite all the attempts by the AFU to counterattack and attack with the aim of cutting off the Dobropilia salient, the Russian forces are holding on to this piece of land and are not giving up, not retreating. Well, we will observe how the situation will unfold, but if the Russian army manages to clear Novo-Ekonomichny and the eastern envelopment of Myrnohrad before the Ukrainian army, then all attempts to counterattack in the breakthrough zone by the AFU will come to naught. Their meaning will be nullified. There will be no point in these counterstrikes, except perhaps from the point of view of somehow straightening the front line, but there may be some purpose in that as well. Next, we are moving towards the Siverskyi direction. From this area, the main events and the main news come to us from the territory of the settlement of Shandryholov. During the night, a number of reliable pro-Russian experts reported that the village is completely controlled by the Russian army. At the moment, the clearing process is underway. Also, a little later, several more video materials appeared where we can observe Ukrainian FPV drone strikes on the positions of the Russian army on the territory of this settlement. Here are a few geolocations that were recorded, plus a report from a pro-Russian expert. And in general, based on all this data, we come to the conclusion that the settlement of Shandryholov is either under the control of the Russian army, or individual streets and districts are in the grey zone. The Ukrainian side no longer has a confident, or rather does not have a confident foothold in the territory of this village, which suggests that in the next day or two, the Ministry of Defense will announce the clearing of the settlement. And in general, the Ukrainian side is already preparing to retreat in order to organize the defense in the area of the Sviatohirsk forests. The Russian army is gradually beginning to suppress communications and destroy AFU equipment in the territory of Novoselivka. Apparently, Novoselivka will be the next settlement that the Russian army will storm in the coming days. I also remind you that yesterday several pro-Russian experts noted the further advance of the Russian armies to the west of the Nitrius River, and the Russian army has made significant progress here. That is, we see that while Lyman, despite the fact that it will most likely be the main target of the Russian offensive, despite the Lyman offensive, the Lyman sector of the front, the units of the Russian army are in no hurry to go in that direction, but prefer to move west from the Nitrius River towards the Oskil River in order to also cut off the supply to the Borova sector of the front. Perhaps after clearing the Borova sector, this very part of the Donetsk region, the northernmost settlements of the Donetsk region are the settlements of Lozova, Rubtsy and Vovchyi Yar. Perhaps after straightening the front line along the northern perimeter of the Donetsk region, only then will the offensive begin to the south towards Sloviansk, Lyman and so on and so forth. It is also possible that the Zapad group of forces will become more active in the Borova sector, where drones are regularly operating. The Ukrainian side is already experiencing problems with supplies because all the roads are under fire, controlled by drones. And in general, there is also already a question of serious exhaustion of Ukrainian formations here. In the northeastern Kharkiv direction, more and more news is coming to us from the side of, specifically, the settlements of Bolohivka and Zaporizhia. Daily, cartographers, mainly pro-Russian ones, are making adjustments in this direction, expanding the zone of presence of Russian units. And if this information is confirmed, then most likely in the coming months, the Russian army will be able to straighten the front line along this red strip. And this will mark the unification of two bridgeheads, the Melov and Katnie bridgehead, as well as the Kamyanka, Zaporizhia bridgehead, and along the Oskil River. And from this hemisphere, the Russian army will move further in a southwestern direction. Information is also coming in about the advance of Russian units in the territory of Vovchansk, already in the southern part, or rather on the part that is located on the Ukrainian Vovcha River. Russian units are gradually advancing towards the last Vovchansk citadel. As we can see, the offensive here is coming from three directions. Moreover, today objective control footage is appearing from the side of, directly, the Pechenihi reservoir, from the Pechenihi dam, showing how Russian drones are striking Ukrainian equipment that is moving along the T-2111 road. And if this information is confirmed, then the Russian side is trying to create a kind of, let's say, zone of control over this direction, the main logistical hub through which the AFU group in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region is supplied. We are waiting for this footage, we are waiting for these geolocations, and this will be another wake-up call, another coin in the piggy bank of, specifically, the third powerful Russian offensive, this time in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. And now let's briefly go over the political news. The German government, led by Friedrich Merz, has hit an anti-record in popularity. According to various polls, no more than a quarter of Germans are satisfied with it, while the country's most popular party has become Alternative for Germany, AfD. This means the Chancellor could be replaced ahead of schedule. But will that change Berlin's anti-Russian policy? According to a YouGov poll, if elections to the Bundestag were held this Sunday, 27% of respondents would vote for Alternative for Germany. This breaks a psychological barrier because the CDU-CSU bloc, whose central figure is Chancellor Friedrich Merz, would be supported by only 26%. Previously, AfD was already considered the most popular German party since it outranked the CDU in ratings, though that was somewhat misleading. CDU and CSU are technically two parties, but operate as one. Now, even together, they are less popular than the leading opposition force. In a Bild poll, the main mass circulation tabloid of Germany, AfD was given 26%, while the Conservatives received 25%. In the same survey, 62% of German citizens rated the government's performance negatively, a new anti-record. In a third major poll, ZDF's political barometer, AfD and CDU-CSU were tied at 26%. But the trend is clearly against the authorities, so this parity is temporary. They've met, only to diverge again. AfD will continue to gain ground, while the Chancellor's bloc will lose support, since there are no preconditions for fixing what Germans dislike about today's Germany. Chancellor Merz is counting on the effect of a gigaloan taken by his government, about $115 billion to be spent on transport infrastructure, social housing, building schools and kindergartens, and on digitalization, where Germany lags laughably behind comparable wealthy nations. Fax machines are still widely used there. The flip side of this sweet sandwich is record-high defense spending, unseen since probably Hitler's times. This and the interests of Germany's military-industrial complex were the real reasons for the loan. But the public needed to be distracted with promises of infrastructure investment. The population is unimpressed. Any positive effect will come only later, while living standards are visibly falling and fears for future generations have already emerged. AfD has also criticized the new federal budget, under which borrowing will rise to $140 billion, calling it a debt orgy. What kind of orgies Germans want to take part in and how much to pay for them is, of course, their domestic affair. But public dissatisfaction with both old problems and new government decisions is something Merz tries to drown out at Russia's expense, going into debt, while Britain shows how falling living standards are worsened by past borrowing. Merz claims was forced by the Russian threat. In his worldview, Russia regularly crosses red lines, sabotages, spies, kills, seeks to sow uncertainty, and wants to destabilize society. In other words, Friedrich Merz has said enough to wish him nothing but political failure, while noting that German society is far more reasonable than its chancellor, given how poorly they rate his policies. Of course, some do believe in the anti-Russian narrative. Even AfD has its own entrenched Russophobic wing, though it is not influential. The party leadership's current line is a detached approach toward Ukraine and a pragmatic approach to Russia, focused on restoring economic ties. As for their attitude toward political Brussels and Ursula von der Leyen personally, it is harsh to the point of relish. Thus, AfD's rise to first place in national polls, despite the media war waged against it, is an important indicator of public sentiment in Germany. But it does not mean the party is close to taking power. That path is still long and likely impassable. What is clear is that the clock counting down to the end of Friedrich Merz's chancellorship is now ticking louder. It would be strange if, with such bad luck, he manages to remain at the head of government until the scheduled parliamentary elections of 2029. A snap election is less likely than his own party simply discarding Merz as ineffective and choosing a new leader. The outcome of such a reshuffle would be worse for the ruling parties, for CDU, CSU, as well as the Social Democrats, SPD. But if Merz, with the charisma of a herring, remains the front figure, protest voting for AfD will become a threat not only to the ruling coalition, but to the political system of Germany itself. Elections to the Bundestag, whenever they are held, that system will most likely survive. If AfD actually came first in voting, nothing fundamental would change. Yes, it would have the right to form a ruling coalition, but no other party would agree to join it. In the end, the Chancellor would still be Merz. Only this time, alongside SPD, he would also have to include the Greens, the party of Annalena Baerbock, lest anyone forget this great geopolitical thinker. By uniting under the principle of everyone against AfD, in German political jargon, Brandmauer firewall, the system would still outscore the anti-system. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, give your likes, and all the best to you.